Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the St. Thomas Alumni Relations webinar. My name is Jenna Johnson, and I am a Program Manager in the Alumni Relations Office. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. John Tower. Dr. Tower will be covering the topic of parenting in youth sports. Dr. Tower is an alum, psychology professor, and head men's basketball coach at St. Thomas. He has been at St. Thomas for 17 years, and last year the men's basketball team won the national championship. Dr. Tower also published a book called Why Less is More for WOSPs, Well-Intentioned, Over-Involved Sports Parents, How to Be the Best Sports Parent You Can Be.
As you look at this kind of interesting world of youth sports, I think the thing that got me into this most powerfully was several years ago. A good friend of mine was talking about one of his friends and their kids in youth sports, and he shared a story where the kid had been up at 5 a.m. For a hockey practice at 5:30, and then he had a baseball practice shortly after that, and then a soccer one to follow. And so by noon on this summer Saturday, this young boy had already been in 3 different practices for about 6 hours total. And it got me thinking about what in the world are we doing to our kids, where sports has become this dominating of their time. And the story became more frightening to me when I found out that the boy was only 8, and that really was sort of the impetus of this project. My research on motivation, which started here at the university as an undergraduate, and then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I studied under Judy Harakevich and explored factors that affect intrinsic motivation, so why people do the things that they do because they love them, as opposed to for praise, rewards, etc. And this journey took me to youth sports, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I have 2 sons who are 14 and 11, Jack and Adam, and so throughout today, I'll share some thoughts on the role that youth sports can play in our society, the role that they currently are playing, and also offer some suggestions for what we might do to improve the state of youth sports. So first few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about our basketball program at St. Thomas and what our philosophy and goals are, and then link that to the study of WOSPs. And when we talk about WOSPs, that's an acronym that I've come up with for Well-Intentioned, Over-Involved Sports Parents. So these parents are not necessarily bad people. It's really a culture of youth sports that has led parents who spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and shower their children with a lot of love, but at some point it may be too much where kids actually have the motivational process interfered with. So we'll talk about 8 common parental pitfalls that get in the way of youth sports and the experience that I think most of us hope that children have. And then we'll end up with some anecdotes and stories on how we can encourage young athletes to derive the lessons that we'd hope they would out of youth sports as they grow and develop into productive members of our society. So when you look at the goals of youth sports, and surveys would certainly bear this out, there's a litany of reasons why kids play youth sports. Some of my fondest memories as a child were, Little League baseball fields, soccer teams where the highlight was popsicles at the end of the game, win or lose. But as parents and coaches, I think certainly we have more noble goals than just having fun. And fun is a part of youth sports, but there are lots of ways that kids can have fun. And so beyond that, something has to happen on the fields and the courts that's teaching these kids character and discipline and lessons that are going to serve them well in life, lessons that surround both individual motivation and determination, but also lessons that are couched in teamwork and working for the greater good. And so as you look at the different goals of youth sports, keep in mind that as we talk about some of the perils of sports today, keeping these goals at the forefront, I think, is one of the critical answers at the end. How do we make sure that kids have a good experience? As parents and coaches, if we can keep these goals in mind, I think we'll do a much better job of ensuring kids have a good experience in sports. So at St. Thomas, we're not dealing with young athletes, but all of our players, they're age 18 to 22 for the most part, and they've come through the youth sports culture, and it is interesting and fascinating to hear the stories that they talk about. Our philosophy for them in many ways is not that much different than you'd have with young athletes. When you look at the lessons that we want them to learn in college, we hope that they're disciplined, that they're driven, that they're motivated, that they're great teammates, They persevere through adversity, through the ups and downs of a season, through injuries. And so our mission statement, faith, family, academics, athletics. I played for Coach Steve Fritz here, and he's still my boss as the athletic director, and this is a mission statement that has been part of the program for decades now, that the priorities are faith and family, and our players come from different faith and family backgrounds, and those come first and foremost, and the academics and athletics come third and fourth, and it's important that they keep those priorities in order. Honor the first two and excel in the last two, with a vision of a talented and unshakable group that works together tirelessly towards a common goal. If you think about what those goals mean, first and foremost, we want to win the national championship, and that's a daunting goal. We're not going to do it every year. We've won 2 in the last 6 years, and the mantra, Dare to be Great, I think highlights that goal. Dennis Denning, who was a coach of mine at Cretin-Derham Hall High School, and Coach Denning won 6 state titles there. He went to St. Thomas and later here at the university won 2 national titles, and I think is as good a coach as you could ever find. And one of the things that he always ingrained in his players was to dare to be great, to never fear losing, but to try to be the best possible player you could be. And after that, you could sleep well knowing you had given it everything you had. So that's our first goal for our player. Second goal, and here you see a photo of the 2011 national championship team. It's great when it works out like that. Dare to be great, be number one. That's what it looks like when you are number one. Here's a slightly different photo. This is Tommy Hannon, who graduated in 2013, and unfortunately, that's a third place trophy. So most things in life, if you're third out of 420, you're feeling really, really good that you're in the top 1 percentile. When you look at those 2 photos, and Tommy was in the first one holding the national championship trophy, here you see his last game of his senior year, heartbroken, crestfallen, but still the desire to be great is something that's really powerful. Vince Lombardi, the legendary Green Bay Packers coach, is often misquoted as saying winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And really what Lombardi, most people attribute to him, is not what he said. Really what he said was winning is not everything, but the desire to win is. And I think here in this picture you see that the desire to win sets you up for some tough times, but also breeds a certain toughness and resilience that's really important. Here you see the 2016 National Championship. Grant Schaefer, who's our senior point guard currently, was a junior captain on last year's team. And so you see the exhilaration of winning a championship, but also the agony of defeat, and that's part of the lessons that sports teach us. Our second goal for our players is what we call sustainable excellence. And Aristotle wrote that excellence is not an act but a habit. And this is far more important, quite frankly, that winning championships is great. It's a tremendous amount of fun, and we'd love to do it every year. But the reality is we know for our players to go out in the community and do great things, what they need to do is something day after day after day where they're really, really good. They don't have to be great every day. They have to be solid. They have to be reliable. They have to be determined. They have to be tough. And so this idea of sustained excellence is really what we've adopted as another mantra in our program. And INCH is an acronym that we use where each inch, if you look at over the course of 4 years, I think there's 1,460 days that our players are at St. Thomas. And if they can get an inch better every day, they're going to be a tremendous asset to the community and the university by the time they're a senior. Each letter in INCH is indebtedness, the I, that they're indebted to their teammates in the community. The N stands for no excuses, that win or lose, we never make excuses, we try to get better. The C centers on communication, being positive in the way we talk with one another. The H is health, physical and mental. The E is for energy and enthusiasm. Everything we do should be performed with great energy. And then the S is selflessness, that we are willing to give more of ourselves for the team and expect very little in return. And so we find that mantra has been really, really helpful for us. If you look at the success the program's had, we're currently on a streak where we've had 11 straight conference titles, 11 straight 20-win seasons, 11 straight NCAA appearances. I think we're the only school in the country with 3 streaks like that. In Division III, Kansas has one, Division I, and one of the things I think we're most proud of our players is they've really bought into that concept of sustainable excellence, of doing things well day after day after day, and not trying to hit a home run, so to speak, on any given day, but just hitting singles consistently and being really, really good teammates. Our third goal for our players stems back to Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, and this was something I had to memorize as a sophomore in a philosophy class here at the University of St. Thomas for Father Stromberg, and quite frankly didn't understand at the time just how important this was. In fact, it was several years after graduation that I realized that those 23 words that Father Stromberg had us memorize really encapsulated in a lot of ways what it meant to be a great person and making decisions for the common good. And so our third goal for our players is that they strive to be great people, great teammates in everything that they do, and that they behave in ways that are universal, where if everyone in the world acted the way that they did, the world becomes a better place. And when you look at these three goals, I think they highlight many of the goals that we're going to talk about with regard to youth sports and how we hope that the 6th, the 8th, the 10-year-old athletes, whether or not they end up playing in college, that they learn these lessons and they could live out dare to be great, excellence is not an act but a habit, and Kant's categorical imperative in whatever endeavors they strive for in life. So let's get to youth sports. How have they changed over the past 30 years? Certainly they have, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a social scientist for that matter. If you drive by a playground these days, typically what you'll see are vacant ball fields and baskets that aren't being shot at, and you might see a stray kid here or there, but quite frankly, unless you see organized sports at a park, you're probably not going to see a lot of kids playing ball. And in many ways, I think that's unfortunate. When you look at how sports have changed over the past 30 years, probably first and foremost for parents, the amount of time, the amount of money, and generally speaking, the investment that parents are making has changed dramatically. That you go back several decades and youth sports generally focused on kids being told by their parents to get out of the house and come back around dinner time. And so 15 or 20 or 25 kids would gather at a playground, and there might be arguments, there might even be fights, there might be tears, and typically the next day they were back there doing it all again. And when you look today, far more focus has gone on organized sports, and there are some really good things about that. I think what we're trying to emphasize is that there's probably a balance between unorganized play, where kids just go to a park and learn lessons amongst themselves, and the organized play of AAU teams and outside teams and personal trainers and all the things that are very valuable, but probably can be overdone when the focus shifts from what lessons are we learning in sports to I need to get scholarships. I need to tweet out where I'm going to college and see how many people like that on social media. It's changed dramatically what high school coaches and athletic directors are expected to do. And I think generally speaking, the parental involvement has provided more organization, but quite frankly, more stress, not just for the kids, but for the parents. You talk to most parents during a week, and they'll talk about weekends as being shuttling kids from one gymnasium or one hockey arena to another, and we'll sort of make jokes about being a professional chauffeur, and that's what their weekends entail. And so sports have changed a lot over the last 30 years, some for the good, some for the bad. When you look at high school coaches, and college coaches for that matter, there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the tactical side, the practices, the games, the scouting, and you look at all these and the job criteria for coaches, and the one thing that typically isn't on that list of qualifications is dealing with parents. Yet if you talk to high school coaches and you ask them what are some of the stressors of their job, if you talk about why they leave high school coaching positions, oftentimes this is one of the top, either the top or the second reason why coaches will say, I just had enough. And so we're trying to figure out how can we do this better as parents, how can we help kids have a better experience, and how can parents enjoy watching their kids grow up and not feel as stressed out by trying to produce the next prodigy. Some of the quotes, I recently surveyed some of my friends in the high school coaching business. One of them told me that parents used to want their kids to learn lessons from sports. Now they want their kids to get scholarships and expect coaches and schools to pave the way. When you look at sort of the egregious acts, you'll find some stories about parents fighting in the stands occasionally, and if you go on YouTube, you can see parents attacking refs or players, and quite frankly, it doesn't take much to know this is blatantly wrong, and it's not the focus of the book WOSPs or what we're talking about today. We all know that's wrong. In fact, I think sometimes it provides us a little security blanket that we think, well, I'm not that parent who's fighting, I'm not yelling at the ref, so I must not be doing anything wrong. Really what we're talking about is a little more insidious. It's the over-involved parent who means really well, but they're probably pressuring their kid a little too much, and that might be pressure to be on a team, it might be pressure to perform at a high level. Anytime you see a kid with a little trepidation at Little League fields, whenever I see a youngster look over at mom or dad after the first strike, I sort of shake my head and think this is not going well, because that tells you the kid's certainly playing, at least in part, if not more than in part, for mom and dad. So when we look at the sports culture and what we're in the middle of here, it's a powerful situation. I remember sort of naively telling friends 8 years ago when my son Jack was in kindergarten that we can create our own leagues. We'll do this more locally. We won't be driving out 45 minutes on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and then watching 3 bad first grade games and then driving home at 6 p.m. thinking, what just happened to my Saturday? Well, I'm in the midst of it. Both of my kids are in travel basketball and travel soccer, and while I love watching them, I do think there is something about the culture of youth sports that it's difficult to get out of. If you want kids to play in this day and age, many of the local leagues are more about participation, and there's a lot of good things that go on there. But if kids really want to play at a high level, it's almost imperative that they play traveling ball in this day and age. And so I think it's important that we understand that it's not just parents who are all off the deep end. It's really the culture of youth sports has changed dramatically over the last several decades, and that's led to some real significant problems. And we'll talk about 8 of these that I highlight in the book that really, I think, challenge the powerful process of youth sports in teaching kids lessons. So first, the need to feel good. This is a basic social need, and the social psychology class that I just taught last fall, this is one of the themes that we talk about repeatedly, that as humans, we like to feel good. It's good that we have this need. If we didn't, we'd do all sorts of things that are painful and probably self-destructive. So this need to feel good can be construed in a very positive way. The problem with sports is that parents and kids all want their kids to feel good, and it leads to sort of the everybody gets a trophy mentality. And we've all seen this. There's more medals and trophies laying around my house, and I haven't seen that many championships won at these traveling tournaments. Probably my favorite note came from a couple little girls several years ago that we were in Hawaii, and my son Jack, who was I think 2 or 3 at the time, met these 3 girls, and they, for whatever reason, they adored him. And I tried to encourage him, don't get used to this, but they'd wait by the pool every day. They'd pull him around on a raft, and they would sit there and wait for this little chunky 2-year-old from Minnesota. And they became pen pals, and I don't think Jack could even write the alphabet at the time, but they became pen pals nonetheless. And so subsequently he got a note from his friends, Maddie and Natalie, and they said, "Dear Jack, how are you doing? I'm still playing soccer. Unfortunately," Maddie didn't spell great, but "unfortunately our team has not won yet, but I have 6 trophies." And so I'm still trying to figure out how she had 6 trophies and had never won a game. But that really, I think, exemplifies the everybody gets a trophy mentality that probably isn't teaching kids that, you know what, sometimes life is painful, and some of the pain is I've got to make a decision whether I want to get better or not. And if kids don't learn that at a young age, we know from hundreds of studies that it's far more difficult to breed resilience in college students and young adults than it is in young kids. And so our young kids really, they can't have the weight of the world on their shoulders, but they do need to learn to metaphorically scrape their knee or bruise their shin and figure out, okay, life's not going to end because we lost some games, but we don't always get a trophy. If we look at a second basic need, the need to be good, these oftentimes are juxtaposed where life is pretty good when we can feel good and be successful and be right at the same time. So often, though, we're forced to make a choice that I want to feel good, but maybe not work as hard as I'd like or as hard as I should, or I want to be the best, but gosh, this might be sort of painful. And when you look at youth sports and you look at some of the more prodigious athletes in the last several decades, there are several stories that really sort of scream out warning signs to us as parents about what we might need to be careful of. Motivation, goals are good. They provide focus and a measuring stick. They help us teach resilience to kids, and they also guide us towards excellence. And so there's no question that this desire to be good is really, really valuable. At the same time, when that gets out of whack, the same way the need to feel good can get out of whack, we see and read some horror stories. And so one of the stories I talk about in the book WOSPs is Todd Marinovich. And I think Marinovich was the first high school player who had ever been profiled on the cover of Sports Illustrated back in the late 80s. He went on to a fair amount of success at the University of Southern California as a freshman there. He helped lead them to a ton of wins, and I think was the National Freshman of the Year, but later fell upon some hard times. You look at Tiger Woods, and there's another child prodigy who, as a youngster, was able to accomplish probably more than any golfer in the history of the world. And we know that behind both Todd Marinovich's story and Tiger Woods' story were powerful parents. And specifically, in Marinovich's case, his father, Marv, you see him there pictured with a stopwatch. And he was very much a dictator and started scripting Todd's life even before he was born. Once he was 1, he was stretching his hamstrings, which I'm not sure how you stretch the hamstrings of a 1-year-old, but he was. And Marinovich was never allowed to eat sugar, never allowed to go to parties with his friends until he decided, I'm going to rebel, and started going to lots of parties, and sadly got addicted to drugs and ended up arrested many times, even during an NFL career. And so what started out as a father wanting his son to be the best quarterback in the country, that ended up happening, and Marinovich at about age 30 said, I have no idea who I am, and struggled with lots of very, very sad ups and downs throughout life, in large part because he felt he had no control over his career. Woods, on the other hand, and we know about the much chronicled ups and downs he's had in his career, especially in the last several years, but the major difference between Earl Woods, his father, and Marv Marinovich is that Earl Woods never forced Tiger to play golf. And so when you watched him play, whether you liked him or not, there was a certain joy and competitiveness that stemmed in large part because Tiger said his dad would tell him at the end of each day, his work day, Earl would come home and say, I'm headed to the course, and Tiger would beg to play and plead to play. And most nights Earl would let him come with a little chuckle, but some nights he wouldn't, in large part because he wanted it to come from Tiger. He wanted that intrinsic motivation that we know is so critical. And so while we know that in both of those stories there were a lot of successes and there were also some really, really tragic downturns, the major difference, I think, is in terms of the autonomy and free choice that Earl Woods gave Tiger. Third, common parental pitfall, and these are all interrelated, extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Why is a kid playing sports? Now, most parents will say, I want my kid to play sports because of the goals we talked about earlier and because we want them to have fun. And the old joke is when parents leave their kids at the ball field and the minivan door opens and they say, hey, have fun, and then they pick them up and they say, did you win? And you think about those two comments, have fun and did you win, and the message to a kid would be very, very confusing if you're thinking, wait a second, mom dropped me off and said have fun and picked me up and said, did you win? And the reality is neither one of those stem directly or connect directly to those goals we talked about earlier. As we said, there are lots of ways kids can have fun. There's lots of ways they can feel successful, but the lessons in sports aren't learned if all kids think about are winning and having fun. So when we look at motivation, I teach a course each spring semester on the different sources of motivation, and it is one of the more ubiquitous topics in the world, from getting up in the morning and brushing our teeth and taking a shower, to eating, to sleeping, to playing, to communicating, to exercising. Everything we do is motivated, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and it guides our behavior throughout all of these activities. Motivation stems from genetic sources, and so biologically we're wired in a certain way. Psychologically we think in certain ways, and each one of us is different. And then environmentally, we know when we're in really healthy environments that promote motivation, and then other environments that can stifle us. And so I think the beautiful thing and the fascinating thing about studying motivation is that the interplay of the biological, psychological, and environmental leads us to be a rich topic, and understanding what it is that makes each one of us tick is both maddening and fascinating at the same time. When we think about extrinsic motivation, we've all had sort of the carrot or the stick approach. If we're only doing something because we want a reward, because we want to be paid, or only because we want to avoid punishment, usually that behavior doesn't last for a long, long time. I know one coach who just has a treadmill next to the basketball facility or the practice court in his university, and anytime a player screws up, they just crank the treadmill up to 18 miles an hour and say, hop on. And the idea is, well, they're going to box out next time. And in fact, that probably works, but you also wonder, what are those players thinking about in terms of, are they just scared of screwing up versus are they truly playing because they love the sport? Extrinsic motivation, I know Skittles, my older son, Jack, would not get toilet trained, could not get toilet trained, and the intrinsic motivation researcher in me said, well, by God, I am going to find a way to get him to do this because he's intrinsically motivated. Finally, after about 6 months of failing miserably, it took about 10 minutes and me telling him that he'd get Skittles every time he went to the bathroom, and 3 times in 10 minutes at dinner he went, and the rest is history. And so there's certainly appreciation for both intrinsic and extrinsic motives. When we're talking about youth sports, I think we need to remember that kids have to drive a lot of this. So if they don't enjoy what they're doing, at the end of the day, they're going to be frustrated and probably rebel. And so intrinsic motivation are these activities driven by a desire to take part in them for their own sake. They're pleasurable, they're enjoyable. These are the activities that I liken to what you do on a Saturday afternoon when you have nothing in the world on your calendar and you get to choose what it is, whether it's reading, whether it's biking, whether it's socializing with friends, but things that we truly enjoy doing. For us, that means finding the players like Peter Leslie here, who's a 2012 grad of UST and a 2015 grad of the law school, one of our all-time great leaders. And Pete, you see here shooting in a gym all on his own. It's sunny outside, and he's choosing to do this because he wants to. There's no pressure. Nobody's forcing him to. And so what we call the arc to success with intrinsic motivation, the A stands for autonomy, people freely choosing to do something as Tiger Woods did in his career. The R for relatedness, the teams are powerful and they're connected in ways that you can tell they care about one another. Here's a picture that I love from a 2009 team of ours where you saw a late meaningful basket that was scored by one of our reserves, yet the team celebrated as if we had won the national championship, and that team probably embodied that kind of relatedness more than any we've had. And then finally, the C is competence. So, if you take a temperature on your intrinsic motivation, am I doing this freely? Am I autonomous? Am I connected with the people surrounded me? Do I care for them and vice versa? And am I good at what I do? Fourth common pitfall, more is better. And this is a pretty simple one. More teams, more games, more training. And you look around the world and we so often, our brains are wired to think more is better. And the reality is moderation exists for a reason. It's powerful. And kids can get burned out. They can overtrain. They can get injured. And ultimately, most of the reasons that kids quit sports is because they say it's not fun anymore. Immediate gratification, believing that I've got to do this right now. I've got to have success right now. I've got to be on the varsity as a young kid and not work my way up. So often the lessons that kids learn are through failure and through patience. Through social comparison, it's very easy as parents to think, well, if my friends have their son signed up for 2 soccer teams and 2 baseball teams, maybe that's better than one of each. And so often we need to center on what's the right thing for our family, for our child at this point in life, and not worrying about what other people are doing is important. Cognitive dissonance, the process through which we justify the investment of time and money. And as we talked earlier, once parents start investing a lot of time and money, it's really, really difficult not to have sort of this slippery slope of, well, more is better than. And last but not least, you see the comic here, mister, you're setting a terrible example. Your kids, you should get some exercise. And the father says, when would I do that? I spend every waking moment driving my kids to hockey practice, soccer practice, baseball practice. It's difficult once we've crossed that divide. And then finally, last but not least, organized sports. The kids today, when you ask them how often you just go to the park and play with other kids, they look at you not with 20% of the time, but it's more like you just spoken a foreign language as if, I don't know, I've never done that before. I've only played in organized sports. And that's, again, where I think we need to strike that balance between letting kids go to the park and play by themselves, and certainly organized sports provide a framework where they're probably getting coached more, they're learning more techniques, but they're also not learning how to negotiate conflict, and they're not learning how to communicate the same way with their peers and their friends. So what can be done? This is not easy, and certainly this is as much as we can cover in about a half an hour. And so to wrap up, I want to leave you with a couple anecdotes. Number one, we have to remind ourselves frequently, what are the goals of youth sports, and are we meeting those? Second, that schools aren't designed to produce world-renowned athletes. They're designed to help teach kids valuable lessons about life. Third, that sports should be fun and promote learning and good behavior in kids, that we should see different sets of values than we saw going in. Fourth, that they're about the kids, not the parents. Anytime the parent starts thinking more about themselves and their frustrations or their joys, that's a problem. And fifth, sometimes less can be more, that when it comes to motivation, enjoyment, curiosity, and learning, sometimes less can be more, that us taking our hands off and letting the kids struggle and letting them grapple and letting them learn some of these lessons can be really, really powerful. So I'll leave you with a couple local anecdotes. One of the chapters in the book is devoted to Joe Mauer. and his family, which I think is a really, really unique one. And Joe's had some ups and downs. He's had injuries. He's been an MVP. He's won 3 batting titles. He's done things that very few players in the history of baseball have done. But he's also had, people when they look at his contract who say, is it possible he's worth that much? Well, that's a question about all professional athletes. But I think the thing that's fascinating about the Mauer family is when you look at them, Joe was one of 3 boys in the family. Jake, his older brother, who was an All-American here at the University of St. Thomas, and Billy, who played at Concordia St. Paul. And all 3 of the boys are well-adjusted, happy kids. And when I interviewed Joe's parents, Jake and Teresa, one of the things that was most fascinating to me is the interview got done, and after about 2.5 hours, I sort of thought, boy, that's not sexy. That's not fascinating. That's nothing mind-blowing. And then I realized, no, that's actually what is fascinating about it is all they did was raise their kids with love and discipline, and they were consistent, and they told the boys, find some things that you love and go play, and they supported them, but they never micromanaged and never controlled them. And certainly that doesn't mean your kid's going to grow up to be the next Joe Mauer, but I'm quite certain that had they tried to produce Joe Mauer and tried to micromanage every day of his life, he would never have turned out to either be the star baseball player that he is or the happy, healthy, well-adjusted adult. Last thing we want to learn from sports, behavior change. For us to change behavior in life, this is not easy. We all know things. Probably in the last couple of weeks, many of us had New Year's resolutions that we said 2017 is the year I'm going to fill in the blank. And we know for people to change, 3 things have to happen. Number 1, I've got to be aware that change is needed. Number 2, I have to be able to change, which quite frankly, we're all capable of far more than we probably give ourselves credit for. But number 3, we have to be motivated to change. And I want to share a quick story about our program to end. And you see on the left, Tommy Hannon, who you saw earlier, he didn't look like that. This was his junior year of high school. He got cut at Cretin-Derham Hall. He was on their junior varsity tryout, and he didn't make it, which it's not easy to get cut from the junior varsity. It's possible, but it's not easy. And the coaches liked Tommy. He went home, and to his parents' credit, Jim and Sue didn't say, well, blame it on the coaches, blame it on the school, I'll call the athletic director. They told Tommy, look, you need to get in shape. Stop eating Doritos. Stop drinking Dr. Pepper. Get off the couch. Get in shape. And Tommy went from a 253-pound junior in high school to his senior year there. You see him with his best friends who were all scholarship athletes. And he lost 51 pounds, grew to be 6'6", which helped a little bit in basketball. And his senior year, he came back, and they put him on the JV. And he was humble enough to be a junior varsity player as a high school senior when all his friends were star athletes. We recruited him at St. Thomas because he was 6'6", and he had a great attitude, and he was a hard worker. Here you see him as a freshman. He made the junior varsity, which he was thrilled to do as a freshman. It took him 4 years to do that at Cretin. As a sophomore, he made our varsity because a guy got hurt. Another guy decided not to play. By the end of the year, he was playing quite a bit. And as a junior, 4 years after being cut from Cretin's junior varsity, there you see Tommy holding the national championship trophy. He was our starting center and named all Final Four. Now, we know the ups and downs of this, and through all this, Tommy ends up losing his last game of his career, where we're ranked number 1 in the country. But I don't know if we've ever had a player that embodied the resilience, and that didn't just come from him. It came from his parents telling him, look, through the ups and downs, we're behind you, but don't look to us for excuses. Don't look to us for coddling. If you want something, you're going to have to work in life. And Tommy went on to be an All-American, played professionally over in Australia, and now works in business in the Twin Cities. This is what our program is really all about, and the lessons that we hope young athletes learn, and also the lessons that the guys in our program learn. In 2006, 2007, we won the first of 11 straight conference titles, and there you see on the left Brian Schnettler, who now coaches at Wayzata, Mike Keating, who's my assistant coach at St. Thomas, and Isaac Rosefeld, who's playing professionally over in Israel. They mentored those guys that you saw earlier on the relatedness slide in the 2009 team that went 30-0 before losing in the Elite Eight. They mentored the guys in 2011 who won a national title, and they mentored the guys like Ryan Sarla, who was the MVP of the national championship game last year in 2016. But the real story behind sports is if you look in the middle there, Cullen Ogren, who graduated last year as well. Cullen, I couldn't find an action photo because, quite frankly, Cullen didn't play a whole lot in his 4 years at St. Thomas, yet he was there every single day in the weight room, in the gym, played on the JV for 2 years, didn't suit up as a junior, and as a senior, our star center gets in foul trouble in the Final Four. We put Cullen Ogren in, and he has his career high in points, in minutes, in rebounds. And when you think about the lessons that Tommy, that Cullen, and all these guys learned from their parents and from youth sports, it was far less about every day being perfect and far more about some days are good, some days are bad, and regardless, we're going to work as hard as we possibly can and be a selfless teammate. And so those are the lessons that we've tried to convey through sports. I've got two boys you see there when they were younger, Jack and Adam. Here they are now in 8th and 6th grade. And it's certainly a joy to watch them. I was raised by two loving parents who I'm incredibly grateful and really this project was dedicated to. And I appreciate all of your time listening today. Hopefully the wonderful world of youth sports can be recreated. And we have a couple questions that we'll take now. But thank you again to all of our listeners. First question, sports specialization. What do you think about kids playing one sport versus multiple sports? And I think, that's been addressed in a lot of ways. And I'll tell you, I think there's both good and bad. I'll tell you the bad of sports specialization, there are many reasons why it's dangerous. Number one, I think most kids don't really know what they love when they're in 5th, 6th, 7th grade. So I always kind of cringe when I hear that a kid's going to specialize in grade school. We also know from lots of studies that overuse injuries, chronic injuries, repetitive use injuries, regardless of the sport, if you're focused too much on one sport, that's dangerous from a health perspective, physically and mentally. I remember interviewing Joe Mauer's parents, and they talked very candidly about how his senior year of high school, the college football coaches were irate that he was playing basketball because they didn't think that made sense. The baseball scouts, where he got drafted number 1 in the Major League Baseball draft, they thought he was nuts for playing high school basketball. Yet to this day, they say that was his favorite sports season in his life, was his senior year of high school basketball, because it was him and his buddies, and he was playing just for the fun of it, and they had a tremendous team, but he loved it. And so I think an example like that, why kids ought to play as many sports as they can, until there's a time where they might say, you know what, I really do want to focus on volleyball or softball or soccer or basketball. But I think particularly in grade school, I would hope that no kid feels the pressure to specialize at that point. Next question. How do you approach a friend or parent who's a WOSP and give advice? This is a delicate one. My 8th grade son, Jack, who can be a smart aleck at times, maybe more than at times, whenever we're at high school games, and invariably there are a couple parents who are a little bit overzealous, he'll nudge me and sort of chuckle and say, hey, Dad, why don't you go give him a book? I've never done that yet. I don't think I'm going to. I tell him he can be the first to try that strategy. But it is difficult. I've certainly sat with parents before and friends who you can see that their child is maybe anxious on the field, and they're talking about why Billy's so nervous, and as an outsider you can see, well, Billy might be nervous because Billy feels like if he doesn't perform, he's not going to be loved unconditionally at home. And I think, one of the things to do is sort of strike up a conversation about youth sports and the goals, and talk very, very generally about what they want for their son or daughter, what you want for your son or daughter, and try to strike up the conversation that way. And maybe at some point, I've had more parents come to me and say, after reading the book, I can't believe this is me. We all get in our own little bubbles in life, and I know there are times where it's helpful to have an outsider make sort of an objective comment. And so starting lightly, I think, is one way. And the second thing is to maybe make a comment or ask a question, generally speaking, about, have you noticed at all that some players tend to play better when they're really smiling, when they're not looking over at their parents, and maybe connect the dots. But unless it's a good friend, quite frankly, I would tread lightly there. I would not go and provide unsolicited advice. Third question. How do you recommend dealing with a high school coach who pushes specialization? So this is linked to the first one we talked about, and doesn't have priorities for work-life balance. To be honest, that gets difficult in high school. I think once kids get to high school in this day and age, the good part about specialization, and I neglected to talk about this earlier, the good part is if you picture any high school and you think about a volleyball team, a soccer team, a basketball team, and a softball team, if the same 10 athletes are the stars on all those teams, then you're only going to have 10 athletes in that school who really play a lot of the minutes. So the benefit of a specialization is at some point the net does get cast a little wider, and you might have different players playing soccer and softball and volleyball and basketball, and higher sheer number of young men and women are getting a chance to participate then and play a lot in varsity athletics. When a coach doesn't seem to appreciate that, I do think it's worth a conversation either with the coach or the athletic director and asking for their perspective, because most athletic directors I know they want kids playing as many sports as they can. They don't want them feeling like they're forced to specialize because, quite frankly, that's better for the athletic department. I think if you ask rather than telling coaches this is what has to be done, oftentimes a compromise can be made. But the other reality is kids do have to choose. At 18, many of them are going to choose a college. And so having to choose one sport over another, or saying, you know what, I'm going to focus on basketball, I'm still going to play volleyball, but I realize I'm probably not going to have the same experience. I think at some point in life, whether it's in high school, we certainly have some athletes who try to play two sports at St. Thomas, which is it's possible, but it's really challenging. I think at some point in life, teaching kids that you do have to make some tough choices, that's a valuable lesson as well. Another question. Do you think that there are external factors that pressure students and parents to be over-involved? I think there's no question. We talk about motivation and the environmental factors. I had a conversation with a recruit's mom several years ago now, and she explained to me that her son wanted to come to St. Thomas, but he had to take a scholarship. Now, the scholarship he was taking was only a partial scholarship at a school he didn't want to go to, where they didn't have the major he wanted, in an area where he didn't want to live, and his dream was to come to St. Thomas and study business here. He didn't because she said they had invested too much time and money. And again, when you look at that cycle, I think it was a wonderful family, and certainly every family has to make their choices. But in this case, the choice was made because the pressure of youth sports had led them to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on traveling basketball. That every sport has their different nuances, but basketball, for example, a lot of AAU teams will travel around the country, and a lot of parents will feel compelled to go to several cities. So if you think about the cost of 6 different weekends away and time off work and flights and hotel rooms, you could be talking about several $1,000s that over the course of 4 or 5 years, if that money were invested in an education account, that might have been $50,000 or $60,000 now for, in this case, this young man's education. So there's no question that there are external factors. I think the important part is that parents and kids together figure out which factors are we going to be responsive to and which ones are we going to say, you know what, those don't really affect our family because here are the reasons why we're playing sports. At the end of the day, we know the probability of any young athlete playing Division I athletics, much less professional sports, is infinitesimally small. And we also know the payoff. If you're spending money on sports to get scholarships and produce pro athletes, it's a horrible investment. We'd be better going to a casino. We'd be better buying lottery tickets, and both of those are terrible investments, yet they're way better than thinking my son or daughter is going to be a pro athlete and make millions of dollars. There are certainly exceptions, but if you look at the billions of dollars spent on sports, very few kids end up with the Joe Mauer type contract. Last question. What types of questions would you ask your child to strike up a conversation when they're frustrated about their lack of playing time? This is a really good, it's a great question, and it's a topic that's complex because much has been written about the car ride home. And what should you say to a child on the way home? Oftentimes, after maybe a strikeout to end the game, maybe a missed free throw, the team loses a heartbreaker. What do you say on the way home? And most of the research says the less you say as a parent, the better, quite frankly. And in those initial moments, right after possibly a devastating loss, maybe it's the end of a team season, maybe a child feels like he or she has let down his or her teammates, the less we say in the car ride home, the better. In fact, some research suggests the best thing we can say to our kids over and over again is, I love watching you play. And just remind them that what I love is watching you play with a smile out there, playing hard, having fun. Now, that said, sometimes the kids are going to be frustrated because they're not playing as much. And I think what's really important, and this certainly is done in concert with coaches, is trying to get the kids to understand 2 things. Number one, we don't always get what we want in life. And that's really important. So often we tell kids, we want to tell them, just work harder, things will get better. Well, we know in life, working harder doesn't always yield the outcome. It certainly increases the likelihood that we're going to get what we want, but it doesn't guarantee it. So that story of Tommy Hannon, who played for us, he had no guarantees he was going to make Cretan's JV. He had no guarantees he was ever going to play for us, but he worked tirelessly, in part because he was intrinsically motivated and in part because he knew this was a goal that he had. So getting kids to understand you're not going to get what you want in life all the time, but working tirelessly, that's going to increase your chances. The second thing, I think, and it harkens back to the first lesson we talked about at the outset, is what are the goals of youth sports? And kids don't always know these. So as parents, it's our job to make compelling cases for why sitting on the bench and being a great teammate, and maybe not making the team that you always want to make, which I've had both of my sons not make the teams they've wanted to make at times, and those are tough conversations, but it's also important to get them to see you don't always get what you want, first and foremost, but second, you're going to learn some lessons through this. You're going to learn maybe you need to work harder in the off season. You're going to learn, you know what, maybe this sport is more challenging for you. You may learn, you know what, I'm on a different team, I'm going to meet a different group of great kids, and this experience is going to be awesome. And I'll close with, so often kids take their cues from us as parents, and if we're frustrated and we badmouth the coach at home, there's no doubt what they'll be doing when they're sitting on the bench not playing. On the other hand, if we promote be the best teammate you can be, have a lot of fun, and see what happens, but enjoy every day you get a chance to be with your teammates, there's a much better chance they'll do exactly that. So I hope you enjoy the conversation on WOSPs. Would love you to pick up a copy, and certainly feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. Thank you.